Dr. Achanta Venugopal from TIFR Mumbai is the first speaker. Dr. Venugopal is a faculty member at the Department of Condensed Matter Physics and Material Sciences at Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, Mumbai since 2004. In 2000, he completed his PhD in physics at the Solid State Electronics Group. He worked on the development of inter-subband transition-based all-optic switch for 1 terabit OTDM networks. He received Doctor of Engineering degree in Electronics from Tokyo University for this work in 2006. Between 2003 and 2004, he worked in the Quantum Information Technology Group, NEC Corporation, Japan, as a JST Fellow as part of the IMI Quantum Computation and Information Project. His current interest is in understanding the basic physics and identifying the nonlinear phenomena to design and realize solid-state all-optical devices for classical and quantum information processing.
The title is mostly, it says that I'll be talking about periodic nanostructures, but I'll also cover some periodic and totally nothing to do with periodic structures. So this work involves Professor Vengurlekar, Sachin is the student, and Prashanta was a postdoc here. He is IIT Kanpur, and these are the 3 collaborators who are involved with different parts of this work. Before that, these are the funding agencies which support this work. TIFR is the main funding agency. We also have funding some bit of it coming from the National Institute of Information and Communication Technology, Department of Science and Technology, UK India Education and Research Initiative, and the Swedish Research Council. So to begin, Professor Hill has yesterday talked about the development of laser over the last 50 years. So if we see a similar development for electronics, because this is quantum and nano computing point of view, so I thought I'll start only with the computer. For example, this is the first computer, the ENIAC, which was built in 1946. It's almost a room of this size, and it has about 18,000 vacuum tubes and use 150 kilowatt of power. Then with the transistor invention in 1947, the first transistor based integrated computer the TRADIC has been built. So it used 800 transistors and used only 100 watt of power. But over the last 50-60 years, due to development in semiconductors, we have the target is about to go for devices or computing devices which are smaller, efficient, and cheaper. So and more powerful, for example. Now with the last generation quad core, we have about 800 million or 832 million transistors on a 1 inch by 1 inch chip. So that's the kind of development which we had over the last 60 years or so. The same thing goes with the lasers. We want more power out of our lasers, wall plug-in type of power supplies, and more compact. So what the question is what's for the future? There are different alternatives. One which Professor Sood has mentioned yesterday in his talk is graphene-based electronic devices. That could be one challenge for the present day electronics, for the futuristic applications. So what I'm going to talk about is more towards optics-based, the photonics-based. So the other problem with present day electronics as we go to smaller and smaller is we are bringing in the metal electrodes closer and closer. This causes interference effects, and we need to look at different ways to couple the signal or use different means of signal transmission between the devices. So one idea is to use optical computing because it has several advantages like parallelism, speed, larger storage density, and minimal crosstalk and interference between these beams. This is supposed to be an optical cavity photonic cavity with a defect inside, and the light beam essentially interacts with the medium, and then like you can use it for optical device applications. Okay. So this is an artist's impression. This was taken from the cover of Photonic Crystals by John Napoulos. Okay, so the idea of this is like you have these couplers to couple light from fiber into your photonic integrated circuit. So these blue ones are dielectric periodic structures which are called the photonic crystals, and these ones are the metal dielectric or plasmonic structures. Okay. So and these light from one part of the circuit to the other is coupled through these one-dimensional paths which are called the one-dimensional waveguides, and you can also have like two-dimensional couplers to couple light from one device to the other. Okay. So what I'll be talking about today is the photonic crystals, the plasmonic structures, and the defects in these structures where like we can put single quantum dots inside them. Okay. So the photonics is already well known in communication, not yet in computing, but in communication it's very well established. You know that it's mainly because like you have larger available bandwidth for an optical fiber compared to the coaxial or twisted pair cables, and you need like fewer number of repeaters if you use a fiber based network. Okay, so we prefer like optical networks, but one of the main drawbacks is like the optical to electrical and electrical to optical conversion at the two ends of the fiber network. Okay. So for this like we need photonic optical devices to overcome or to remove these bottlenecks. So this is one example of such device, which is a photonic integrated circuit which is commercially available by a company called Infinera. It is a 10-channel, 10 gigabit per second to give a total of 100 gigabit per second electro-optic converter for fiber networks. It has 10 incoming channels where the signal comes in electrical form. It drives like 10 different lasers on the chip, and then like there are components to modulate your signals and then launch the light in 10 different channels in a WDM network. So the signal is coupled to the optical fiber. Okay. So the photonic integrated are possible, okay, but it doesn't mean that it's end of the electronics, just because if you look at the number of devices per chip. So for the electronics we know that like the development follows the Moore's law. Okay, so we have about like 2 billion transistors on an Intel SRAM. This was in 2009. So the more recent one, of course, like it goes as per the Moore's law. But compared to that, like we have almost like about couple of hundred on a photonic integrated circuit as of now. So now even if we think that like the photonic components on a chip goes as per the Moore's law, okay, we'll have like at least like about 7 orders of magnitude difference in the number of components per chip in a photonic integrated device. Okay. The problem is the cost. Okay, so the cost of photonic circuits is much higher than electronics to really expect the photonic circuits to take over the electronics. There is a lot which is to be between the electronics and photonics to make like widely usable photonic integrated circuits in the future. Okay. So if you look at like purely from optics point of view, photonic integrated circuits point of view, in all optical devices point of view, like if you look at information processing, by which like we mean both classical and quantum communication and computing, we can consider like 3 different fields. One is the photonic crystals, which can be used as active devices. We have plasmonics, which is essentially study and application of plasmons, which is charge density wave at the metal dielectric interface. Okay. These can be used for enhancing the nonlinearities, okay, and used as waveguides, the coupling the signal from one part to the other, and quantum dots, which are essentially solid state equivalent of a 2-level system or an atom. Okay. So you can combine these 3 things and probably like have eventual future photonic integrated circuits. So our interest is in metallodielectric photonic crystals. So essentially we design, fabricate and characterize them. Okay. So in the talk, like I'll try to tell you that what is our interest, what is which has been done in the world, and where these are useful, then like what is our contribution to this. Okay. So the outline of my talk is like, first I'll talk about photonic crystals and I'll try to impress upon you that crystals or the photonic integrated circuits are limited in size which is governed by the diffraction limit. Okay, size is essentially, if you want to miniaturize, you need to go beyond photonics. Okay, that's where the plasmonics is interesting. Okay, in addition, plasmonics also offers the advantage of photonics in terms of speed, because the speed of plasmons is essentially almost comparable to that of photons. And then I'll also present some results on decoherence in single quantum dots from the Q part of the CONSAS. Okay. So photonic crystals are essentially periodic dielectric structures. Our interest is in two fields. One is to achieve high quality factor cavities with quantum dots as defects, and the second one is can we have low cost fabrication alternatives for making these periodic structures. Okay. So I'll briefly introduce you to photonic crystals. These are not new in nature. We know them almost in our everyday life. For example, this is the Brazilian beetle. So the scales essentially are pretty beautiful green. So if you look at under the microscope, you will see these holes. These are air holes drilled in a dielectric layer. So each of the wings has a microstructure like this. So these essentially the periodic structure, periodic air holes drilled in your dielectric layer provides this reflection of this green light, which gives the color to the Brazilian beetle. The same thing is with peacock feathers. So there are different shades of a color, and there are different colors. So these come because periodicity is changed. Okay, these are keratin is a chemical component. So essentially the keratin nanowires are essentially placed in a periodic fashion, which leads to these different hues and colors. So it's not, these air holes is not the only component, but chemical is important. So no keratin, so then essentially it's an albino peacock. So essentially there is no keratin in this, so it looks like, all these colors are missing in this. It just looks like white feathers. Okay. So another example is the beautiful butterfly wings which we see in nature. So there is an interesting paper last year. So it shows if you arrange these periodic air holes in a given dielectric, for example, you can arrange them in a simple cubic or a BCC or FCC lattice. Okay. So and then they calculated what is the reflected color as a function of angle. Okay. You see that the reflected colors are different depending on how the air holes for a given period, if you change the orientation, how this periodicity is changed, how the lattice is modified, you can change the colors which are reflected from this periodic structure. So the nature has all these things, but in artificial or the man-made stuff, you can make these periodic structures, so what are called the photonic band gap materials, by having alternating layers of dielectric materials. This is the simplest structure one can make. For example, you can have gallium arsenide and air, or gallium arsenide and aluminum gallium arsenide. So you have two materials with different refractive indices, and if you have a periodic structure, a hetero layer like this, you transmit light through this. What you see is if you transmit a band of wavelengths, some wavelengths do not get transmitted through this, they just get scattered. Okay. So this is the photonic band gap. Okay. So you can have 2D structures, in which case you can have dielectric rods in air, what Professor Sani has shown. So you can have these silicon nanowires or any nanowires standing in air, for example, or you can take a dielectric material and drill holes in them. Okay. And 3D structures are you can use interference effects to make these lattices, or you can have the so-called wood pile structure which is built essentially from bottom-up approaches. So all these essentially if you have a periodic structure, there is nothing interesting, you get a band gap. But what makes them interesting, what makes these photonic band gap materials interesting is when you make a defect in them. Okay, you can make a defect, but for example, if you have rods standing in air, you can have modify the size, shape or position of one of the rods. Okay, then you have a point defect. Or you can have a line defect where you can modify a row of these rods. And surface is always a defect. Okay, once you have this, like you can do a lot more with your structure. Okay, for example, if you have a point defect, so all these rods on each side essentially acts like mirror. Okay, so essentially light which is coupled into the system, so they get reflected through the because of these mirror-like structures, and the field gets confined at the point defect. So you have a cavity, and because like these dimensions are micron or submicron, you have the so-called microcavities using photonic crystal defects. For example, you can use line defects for waveguide applications. So this is one of our results. So this is the so-called air bridge structure or a membrane structure, where like we make the air hole pattern on a quantum dot structure, and then like remove the bottom aluminum gallium arsenide layer to make the membrane standing. So this thickness of the membrane is typically like 100 to 150 nanometer, and this is achieved so that like you have n equal to 1, the air above and below, so that you have maximum confinement. In addition, like we modulate the thickness of this air layer so that like you have the bottom reflected and the top emitted. I mean essentially if you have a quantum dot inside this, like it will be emitting in all directions. So the emitted light which is bounced back from the bottom reflector essentially is in phase with your top surface, so that like you have a cone of emission. So this we are looking towards single photon emitter applications. So okay, so yesterday Professor Hill has talked about Purcell enhancement. So this is how it looks like. So these are all these small spikes are because like there are lots of quantum dots, but when the quantum dot resonance matches with your cavity, like you have enhancement in your luminescence. So from the line width, like we estimate the Q to be about 5000. The calculated Qs are 2 orders of magnitude larger. So we're trying to optimize the fabrication process to improve the Q factor currently. So these are with quantum dots as defects inside them. So just to show you like photonic crystals are useful in many different fields, including fibers, photonic crystal fibers. So this is one example of a switch. Okay, so essentially this is a Mach-Zehnder switch. We have a control pulse, 2 control pulses and a signal pulse. So the signal pulse essentially is split at the position here, and then it travels 2 paths, and then like you measure the interference, okay, of these. So now if you use a control pulse to change the refractive index, for example, in this reference, like they have used quantum dots. Okay, by using the control pulse, you can control the absorption of the quantum dots. So that changes your saturable absorption. You control that. So you are changing the refractive index of one of the paths. So that changes the phase of one of the components with respect to the other. By controlling the control pulse intensity, you can vary either you can get a constructive or destructive interference. Okay. So you can have like 2 controls to get better control over it. So they have demonstrated a 40 gigahertz switching operation using this device. So you can get like very fast devices using photonic crystal based structures. But the problem is like it's limited by the diffraction limit. The sizes are still in the micron region. So you need to go to submicron regions where like essentially plasmonics is more interesting. So the other aspect which I mentioned is like we're interested in low cost alternatives, fabrication alternatives to these periodic structures. One idea which we pursued is the Z-scan based optical trap. So essentially what we do is like the typical Z-scan setup, like where we have an objective lens. Okay, so either we can move the lens or we can move the sample. So here we mounted the sample on a moving stage and then move the sample in and out of the focus. As we move in and out of the focus, what we are changing is essentially the gradient to the particle. So if you have a suspension of polystyrene beads or silica beads or anything, I mean any particles like which we want to trap. So eventually what happens is by moving in and out of it, like we are changing the gradient and then we can trap more and more particles. So eventually like you get a closed spec structure. And if you look at the transmitted light as a function of this, the movement, what you see is like initially there is a random distribution of particles. So the light is getting scattered. If you talk about micron size particles or even like submicron particles where the particle size is comparable to your wavelength. Okay, so the light gets scattered and very little transmission is there. But as you get close packed structure, what you see is like the first order diffraction essentially becomes stronger, and you see like large transmission. So by looking at the transmission, you know like whether you have a disordered system or an ordered system. Okay. So this is what it's shown like. So initially there is no, it's completely disordered system. You have a dip in your transmission. So the central position is essentially the focal point essentially. So but as you increase your intensity, at certain intensity you start seeing this enhancement in transmission. Okay, that's what you see like. So essentially when you have the close packed structure, you have very nice large transmission. Okay. The best way to look at it is look at the diffraction pattern. What you see is like initially it's completely random system. You see the Debye-Scherrer ring which evolves into the clean diffraction pattern, showing that you do have a periodic structure. I've done a lot of work essentially on this. So these are lots of references in the last 2 years. So the other one which we looked at is magnetic fluid film, because this is biologically also like interesting, because you can put them, it's inside your live tissues and other things. So we looked at like ester based Fe3O4 particles. Okay. So here the process is different, because you have like nanometer size particles. So initially like you have the light gets transmitted without any scattering. But as you increase the cluster size by controlling the external magnetic field and your trap light intensity, you're changing the cluster size, and essentially like you can see Anderson localization kind of effects in these systems. Okay. So this is to show that like the seeding, the trap light acts like a seed. So whatever clustering, it starts happening within your laser spot region, and then like the entire region gets clustered. So what happens is like essentially we find first what is the optimum intensity required for the optical trap light, okay, and then vary the magnetic field. As we vary the magnetic field, like the cluster size increases. What we calculated is like we require about 200 nanometer is the optimum size of the cluster for, in this case like it's 1.55 micron wavelength. Okay. So as you see like there is a stopgap formation, okay, which actually as the cluster size increases, like the stopgap region shifts to longer wavelengths. Okay. So the arrows indicate the center of the stopgap region. So unlike the photonic bandgap materials, like where the bandgap essentially depends on the lattice constant or the periodicity. So in the stopgap, like in random colloids, like the stopgap essentially depends on the size of the scattering particle. So if you change your cluster size, you can change your stopgap region. Use it for the switching application. For example, you can like get 40 dB of extinction ratio. So you have your on pulse, okay, and then like when you switch it on and off, or when your trap light is on and off, okay. So you use like different intensities of light. See that like for a given magnetic field value, like for example, we have chosen 300 nanometer as the optimum magnetic field which is applied. So for a given magnetic field, we vary the trap light intensity. So what we see is like when you switch it on, okay, so essentially because of the clustering which is happening in the trap region, like so the transmission drops. Okay, when you remove the trap light, so essentially your transmission comes back. Okay. So you see it, to further show that like the cluster size is important. So when you have like very large powers, essentially your cluster size essentially becomes slightly bigger, and then like it slowly comes back to your optimum cluster size. So essentially you see a sudden drop again, okay, but again it recovers when the size essentially disintegrates. Okay. So the more recent work is on thermophoresis. Essentially you can have like mix different particles. For example, you mix your silica beads which have a negative Soret coefficient with magnetic material like Fe3O4, which is a positive Soret coefficient. So essentially what happens is if you use light, okay, your trap light, laser light, you focus it, so you're locally heating your medium. So because of this local heating, the magnetic particles move away from the heating region, okay, which creates a gradient for the silica particles to move in, silica beads to move inside. Okay, you can use this to essentially get close packed structures once again. So we have seen like 5 to 7 layers of these stack of silica beads. Okay. So you see like a nice diffraction pattern when you have the periodic structures formed. So I'll move to the next topic, like which is plasmonics. As I tried to mention a couple of times, the problem with photonics is like the sizes are micron size. Okay, so comparable to wavelength of light. So you want to go to submicron regions. Like one interesting field is plasmonics. Okay, this is interesting for nanophotonics point of view. Okay, so if you look at like interaction of light with metallic nanostructures, where the metallic nanostructures can be in the form of thin metal films on dielectrics, or array of holes, slits, grooves in metal films, or you take like metal tips, nanoparticles, strips, or wires and antennas. So all these things are governed by the plasmonics. Okay. So these studies, the plasmonic studies, are useful. They have been demonstrated to be useful for microscopy, where you are talking about like sub-wavelength imaging, okay, sub-wavelength lithography, or spectroscopy. Okay, SARS is one of the examples of spectroscopy, okay, where these are all on sub-wavelength or nanometer scales. Okay. So essentially, nanophotonics is surface plasmon assisted photonics. Okay. So what are surface plasmons? If we solve the Maxwell's equations, the wave equation, like you can actually get the solutions that like for the TM polarized light, where your electric field is along the surface, parallel to the surface, you can excite the surface modes. Okay. Now if you have a metal and a dielectric interface, you have lots of these free electrons. So the free electrons, they essentially oscillate in tandem. So you have a charge density wave traveling as a surface mode at the interface of your metal and dielectric. Okay. So that's what is the surface plasmon polaritron wave. Okay. So the problem in exciting the surface plasmons using light is the momentum mismatch. You need like energy conservation and momentum conservation. So energy conservation happens when your light wavelength matches with your plasmon wavelength. Okay. But for a given light wavelength, okay, for example light frequency or energy, so the light has a straight line. This is the dispersion, omega versus k. Okay. So this is the light line. Okay, but the surface plasmon dispersion shows that like there is for a given omega, like you have momentum mismatch. So you need to overcome this momentum mismatch. So that's the challenge in optically exciting the surface plasmons. Okay. So I'll show like how this is overcome, but just to show the importance of plasmonics. So this is for nanophotonic applications, like this is reported in 2005. So these are 250 nanometer wide, so essentially this is a 250 nanometer wide silver strip into which like light is focused from this side. So these are like silver nano dots which are arranged in a particular fashion to focus light into this waveguide. So this is the experimental result. So the other application is plasmonic waveguide. Essentially you can have this periodic, for example like gold or silver nano dots on a semiconductor surface. So you can launch light and then like this acts like a waveguide for light. Okay. The advantage is again like it's sub-micron, sub-wavelength. Okay. You're talking about coupling 1.55 micron light with say like 50 nanometer or 75 nanometer size of dots. So this is another very interesting result which came up last year. This is the world's tiniest laser emitting at 525 nanometer. This is called the so-called SPAZR. It's a nano laser. It consists of a gold core and a sodium silicate shell. On top of it you have a dye which is coated on top. Okay. The overall size of this is about 44 nanometer. This is the field profile which is emitted. So this again is based on plasmon mediated enhancement in emission. Okay. So, but the problem with this is like it emits in all directions, unlike a laser like which you want a pointed light. Okay, so here it emits in all directions. Okay. So for that also there is a solution which came up this year. Like essentially you can modulate the grating structure. For example, you can put it. This is a surface emitting laser. This is a QIP, quantum well infrared laser. Like so, this emits in the terahertz wavelength. So you can modulate the top with, you make a metal pattern and design your pattern so that like you get a collimation out of your laser. So for surface or edge emitting lasers, like the light is emitted in a big cone. Now just at the edge or on the surface, like you put these metal patterns to collimate your laser output. Okay. So they are very interesting work which is happening from application point of view. So as I mentioned, like one of the challenges is exciting these surface plasmons using light. Okay, how do we overcome the momentum mismatch? There are two geometries which are used in the extensively. One which has been studied most is the Freshman-Rather prism geometry. You have a prism on which on one face of it, like you put a thin layer of metal. Okay, or other is auto geometry where like you put a dielectric first and on top of it you put a metal. By controlling the thickness of your dielectric layer, you can control the coupling. So the idea is that like by choosing the angle of incidence, so one component of the diffracted light essentially is along the surface and that excites the surface plasmons. Okay. What we look at is the grating geometry. For example, this is you take a metal and then like you pattern this metal, like use electron beam lithography, which Professor Saini has already talked about. You make these grating lines on this, for example, or you can make like 2D structures. Okay. So how does this work? Like, so essentially this is the charge density wave which travels on the surface. This is the electric field profile. So if you have the interface, like on one side you have the dielectric and the other side you have the metal. So this is the field, how the field decays. The property of the surface wave or the definition of the surface wave is that it travels on the surface and on either side away from the surface, like the field decays exponentially. Okay. So this is the dispersion for the light and the plasmons. You have the momentum mismatch, but this grating component, additionally the Bragg component essentially gives the additional component required for the light momentum to match with that of the plasmons. Okay. If you have a periodic 1D structure like this, you can have like, because we're talking about a finite structure, like the light gets reflected from the air at the either interface. Okay, then you have a standing wave. So the standing waves have two components where one of them has a maximum on the metal, one of them has maximum on the dielectric. So these two have two different frequencies. Essentially the two modes are different. So that generates a band gap between for the plasmons, like what we see for photonic and the normal crystals, where the electronic waves have band gaps. Electronic band gaps or photonic band gaps, you can have like surface plasmon band gaps in periodic structures. Okay. So some of the structures which we studied are patterned dielectric with metal on top, and we have dielectric patterns on metal layers and metal patterns on dielectric layers. Okay, we looked at the femtosecond dynamics, grating fabrication, and also dispersion measurements in this. Okay. So one of the early studies was to look at like you pattern your quartz substrate, for example, and then deposit thin layer of gold. Okay, you have a structure like this where this gold thickness is about 50 to 100 nanometers. Now when we launch a short pulse, what we see is essentially a laser pulse comes and it gets some funny shape. Okay. The funny shape essentially depends on the interaction of light with your plasmon. Okay. So, or plasmon mediated interaction. So we look at, we do the time resolved transmission measurements to resolve this pulse shape. And then what we see is like when the pulse is non-resonant with your plasmon. For example, like you look at the dispersion, you choose a wavelength which is where we are not exciting any plasmons. For example, you take 780 nanometer in this case. Okay, you see that like this is through the glass region, the dotted one which is very faint, and the one in the solid line is essentially through the sample. So there is not much change in the shape between the two. This is a semi-log plot. But what's interesting is like when you choose a resonant wavelength. For example, we choose like 750 nanometer, which is at the long wavelength band edge of the plasmon. So you see that like there is a slight, there is a change in the shape, okay, but the pulse width is within the within your reference pulse, okay, so showing that the lifetime of the plasmon is much faster. Okay. But on the other hand, if you look at the B point, which is the short wavelength band edge, like you see a very slow decay in your pulse shape. So by fitting an exponential, you can get the lifetime. Okay. So what we see is like the long wavelength band edge has about 20 femtosecond, which is generally accepted plasmon lifetime. But if you look at the short wavelength band edge, like the lifetime is about 250 femtosecond, which is much longer, order of magnitude longer than the widely accepted plasmon lifetime. So this essentially is also made sure from the dispersion measurements. So this is a contour plot. Essentially each line, we measure the spectrum, maybe I'll explain it a little later. So what this shows is the width of this is a grayscale plot where this shows the line width of your plasmon. So the wider the width, the faster the lifetime. Okay. So you can, actually from the line width, like if you measure the lifetimes, expected lifetimes match with what we measured here from the lifetime measurements. Okay. So almost all the studies so far are on pattern dielectric metal overlayer or pattern metal. So we wanted to look at like metal is continuous, on top of it we put dielectric layer. So what happens in this case? The advantage here is like in this kind of structure is like, for example, you can apply an external electric or magnetic field or temperature, vary the temperature, and you can vary the refractive index of the top dielectric layer and can control the plasmon dispersions. Okay. So towards that, like we looked at these structures. So there are also in literature different studies, like essentially you have a metal layer and then you have a dielectric layer on top of which you put these metal nanoparticles, for example. By controlling this dielectric layer thickness, you can control the interaction between the metal layer and the metal particles. So that changes, that causes shift in your plasmon dip or plasmon resonance. Okay. So similar studies were also used to couple localized and propagating plasmons. So you have a AG film and then top metal gratings. Okay, I'll show you some results similar to this. Okay. So what we have seen is essentially if you have a quartz dielectric and on top of which you deposit metal and you put like semiconductor nano dots. Okay, for example, this is zinc sulfide coated zinc oxide nanoparticles. So you see like enhancement in luminescence by almost like 2.5 times. Okay, so this we believe it's a plasmon mediated enhancement in the luminescence. Okay. So we also look at different structures. For example, like you have the substrate and on top of which you have a thin metal, you have an unpatterned dielectric and a patterned dielectric on top. Okay. Now if you look at this structure, like this is a asymmetric structure in the sense that like the refractive index of this top dielectric is slightly different from that of the substrate. Okay. So you have like when you have very thin metal layer, like you can have plasmons on the top interface as well as at the bottom interface, depending of course on the momentum conservation. Okay. So what we see in this structure is like you have a band gap as expected, okay, but the line width is much shorter, showing that the lifetimes could be much longer. Okay. But if you have a symmetric structure, okay, where we put a dielectric underneath, put a metal on top of it and then put another dielectric on top and then pattern from the top. Okay, this is a symmetric structure where the plasmon resonance at the top and the bottom interface are identical. Okay, so the plasmons which are excited at the top essentially couple to the plasmons at the bottom interface and then radiate out. Okay, so you have very fast lifetimes expected in this case, in which case like your line width is expected to be very broad. That's what you see here, like the line widths compared to this are very broad for a symmetric structure. Okay, if you want to look at like waveguide applications, like these kind of things are interesting to look at. So we also look at like top metal. Okay, so just to show that like what we are exciting is the metal air at the metal air interface. If you have on top of it, if you put a dielectric overlayer, so there is no plasmon excitation. So essentially what we are exciting is the metal air interface. So you also did a lot of work on two-dimensional patterns. These are like air holes in dielectric, or we can have like pillars on dielectric, essentially air around. So you can have like similarly like metal overcoating or metal unpatterned metal underneath. What is interesting in this is like these colors are pretty bad, but okay. In any case, okay. So there are three different things which I would like to point out. Okay, first one is like the period is 790 nanometer. The top period is 790 nanometer. You see a like very flat dispersion mode, which we believe now relates to the localized plasmon excitation, and you have these dispersive modes, which are essentially the propagating modes. So the top period essentially governs these propagating plasmon modes. Okay, but the localized plasmon mode, which is essentially the metal particulates which are on top of the surface, so they are not governed by the top pattern. Okay. So when we make the period of the top grating, so essentially we are making this localized plasmon mode and the surface plasmon mode to be resonant. Okay. So when we have the resonant condition, like each of the propagating plasmon modes interact coupled to the localized plasmon mode, and you see splittings in your energy levels, and the dispersion becomes pretty complicated. Okay, so we're looking at like the coupled localized and surface plasmon structures and how we can use them for different applications. So even if it is slightly off resonant, like you see the anti-crossing kind of behavior in these structures, like which we're trying to probe like for different applications right now. Did lots of theoretical calculations to identify like what are these modes and correspond to. Okay. This is SEM image of the top layer showing the particulates to show that like we actually have localized plasmon excitation in these structures. This is a calculation, so just to show that like there is a plasmon, launch a white light and then look at the absorption corresponding to the localized plasmons. So that this matches with what we are seeing, showing that these are indeed particle plasmon resonances. Okay. We also made different structures using interference lithography. These are dielectric rods in air. You can vary the size, shape and orientation of these. You can have like for example hills, or you can have trenches. So these are all like submicron features. You can go as low as like 0.4 micron. The smallest feature we could get was about 50 nanometer using interference lithography. Okay. We made this quasi-crystal kind of patterns in dielectric. Okay. So the next one is I mentioned that like the problem with photonics is one is size, the second one is essentially cost, the third one is the nonlinearities are not high enough to use them for efficient devices. So we can use plasmonics to enhance the nonlinearities or the optical effects. For example, in this case, like what we studied is the magneto-optical Kerr effect. So the idea is like you have the substrate on which like you have a magnetic material. In this case, it's a bismuth, yttrium, iron, garnet. On top of which like we have the metal gratings. Okay. So we match the grating structure to have the plasmon resonance match with the absorption in your magnetic layer. Okay. So when you have this, when you have the both plasmon excitation as well as the absorption in your magnetic layer, you can enhance the magneto-optical effect. In this case, like we look at the Kerr effect, we are seeing like 3 orders of magnitude improvement, enhancement in magneto-optical Kerr effect using this. You can have like different geometries. The magnetic field can be parallel to your gratings or in plane perpendicular to your gratings. Similarly, like you can have the incoming light either perpendicular or parallel to your orientation, essentially with respect to the gratings. Okay. So this is the structure which has been fabricated. Okay. So we see like wherever the plasmon dip is, like so the red line is your transmission. The dips correspond to the plasmon excitation. So where there is a plasmon excitation, you see a large enhancement in your magneto-optical Kerr effect. So you've seen this, done the angle dependence and under different orientations. Okay, this has been communicated, and so the magnetic field dependence, and as I said, like you can choose the orientation of your magnetic field, and you can choose the polarization of your light. Okay, to equate both surface plasmon and the MOKE in one case, or only the Kerr effect, or nothing at all, or only surface plasmon exclusion. So you see that the enhancement is seen only when you have the both present. So I'll just briefly show you the decoherence in single quantum dots. This is for the Q part of the conference. Okay. So we all know that decoherence is one of the most important problems in quantum communication or quantum information. Okay. So so I'll briefly outline like what are the origin of decoherence in quantum dots. I'll present the theoretical model very briefly and show the experiment and the results. Okay. So quantum dots, I just want to tell you that like once again they are solid state equivalent of two level systems. There is a lot from the material science point of view over the last 20 years or so. Okay. So from fabrication point of view, material science point of view, like how you can fabricate them, how we can control the growth parameters like the size, shape and all that. Okay. But over the last 10 years or so, the emphasis is more on demonstrating the atom-like properties of quantum dots. Okay. For example, there are like discrete optical spectrum, okay, and entanglement in using quantum dots. Okay, you have the anti-bunching or the single photon emission from these quantum dots has been shown in 2000. Okay, so they're driven Rabi oscillation, rest states, and optical control of single charge and spin excitons. These are all like atom-like properties are being demonstrated in quantum dots. But one crucial difference between a quantum dot and an atom is interaction of the quantum dot with its environment. The quantum dot, unlike an atom, is not in a vacuum or evacuated space. It's in a host material, so the interaction with the host is a very important aspect. Okay. So the effect of environment is essentially on the decoherence, okay, or the dephasing time. Okay. So this can be measured by looking at the Rabi oscillations. You can do either Rabi oscillations in the time domain, or you can do it in a time integrated measurements by looking at the dependence on the pulse area. For example, you can look at the Rabi rotations. Okay. So essentially, if you are measuring the Rabi oscillations, what you see is there is a loss of coherence is manifested as a decay in your Rabi oscillations, the damping of these Rabi oscillations. So you have a large intensity and then like the intensity goes damped. Okay. By looking at this, like you can actually estimate the dephasing time. So the dephasing is important because the fidelity of a qubit device is limited by the dephasing time. So we need to, for any meaningful quantum information measurements, you need to make like thousands of measurements before the signal is lost, okay, before the coherence is lost. Okay, so you need to have longer the dephasing, like the more number of measurements you can make before the signal is lost. Okay, so for example, if you look at single quantum dots, the origin of intensity dependent dephasing is depends on the structure, on what kind of quantum dot you are looking at. Okay. So, but if you look at the main problem which we are trying to address, there are two different models in the literature on what is the dominant source of excitation induced dephasing in quantum dots. One is called the so-called waiting layer, which argues that like your electron is in the quantum dot, but your hole is in the waiting layer, which is essentially a quantum well which is formed while you are making your quantum dot. Okay, so the electron and hole, because of this non-local thing, like there is a dephasing mechanism, okay, which leads to which is the dominant mechanism. That's what this model shows, and this has experimentally also been demonstrated. But then if you really look at it, like the phonon quantum dot coupling is a basic dephasing mechanism, and it should be there irrespective of the type of the quantum dot. Okay. So the dominant or the very basic dephasing mechanism should be phonon quantum dot coupling. Okay, this has not been experimentally shown, so this is what we wanted to check. Okay. So towards this, like there is a theoretical model developed. So look at essentially the Rabi frequency. Okay. So, and we assume that the excited carriers interact with a reservoir of acoustic phonons, and LO phonons are much higher in energy, so we ignore them. Okay. A Hamiltonian has been written which has three components. One is the control, okay, and the second is the phonon bar, and then the interaction term. Okay. So, so if you look at the excitation induced dephasing parameter, so essentially like you get like you do all the math and then you get essentially that you have a K2 parameter which depends on essentially the material, the bulk parameters, and then the temperature. Okay. So we have a linear dependence with temperature is expected for the dephasing induced parameter. So what we wanted to do is measure this K2 parameter as a function of temperature. So we need to do electric field dependence. Okay, so the theoretical observations are that like electric field dependence is on tunneling rate and probably not on the damping, and the rate of EID due to acoustic phonon mediated interactions is dot independent. Okay, so we designed our experiment to match all these things. Okay, we take like single quantum dots, do photocurrent measurements. So essentially, an electron is excited by optical excitation, and then like because of the applied bias you measure the current. So each of these electron hole pairs like result in some picoamps of current. You measure the current as a function of your pulse area, for example. So this is a photocurrent spectrum. So as you sweep your incident light wavelength, so you see essentially a peak. So the peak essentially matches with the exciton resonance because you have maximum absorption. So it uses pulse shaper. It's a two grating. Okay, it's a 4F0 dispersion compensator. So to control the pulse width so that we don't excite the biexcitons, and we also choose the polarization such that like we don't there is no two photon absorption of the biexciton. Okay. And from these measurements, like so the spectral width dependence, just to show these are the oscillations. This is as a function of power. The photocurrent. Let's skip this. So we choose the bias voltage, the gate voltage, because if the gate voltage is too large, you will see tunneling. So you optimize your gate voltage for the measurement so that tunneling is minimum. Okay, so this is the main result. As a function of temperature, you measure the Rabi oscillations, and the red lines are the fits from which like we estimate the K2 parameter. So this is the K2 as a function of temperature. As expected, it's linear. So the variation in the literature values gives the variation in the fit parameters. So from this, what we estimate is A is, so essentially K2 is linear in temperature as expected for the acoustic phonon mediated damping, and the A parameter is about 11 femtosecond per Kelvin. Okay. So as expected from the theory again, like we did the measurements on 7 different dots, so there is not much difference in the Rabi rotations, showing that indeed like this is dot independent. Okay, so for future point of view, like how do we suppress EID, the dephasing? So one thing is like you can use low temperatures and slower control pulses. You can minimize exciton population by using off resonant control schemes, and you can use materials with faster speed of light like NV centers in diamond to have longer dephasing times. Just to summarize my talk, like our research interests include single and coupled quantum dot spectroscopy. I have shown one example on acoustic phonon mediated exciton dephasing. Okay. Then exciton dynamics is what we look at. And in plasmonics, like we have dielectric patterns on metal to control emission. We control the SPP dispersion by controlling the material parameters. And we're looking at right now magneto-optical effects. So how to enhance the magneto-optical effects. We recently demonstrated enhancement of 3 orders of Kerr effect. We are looking at Faraday enhancement, Faraday rotation enhancement currently. We are also looking at semiconductor materials to enhance the luminescence. Okay. So you look at like photonic crystals, like we are looking at high quality factor cavity design and realization with quantum dots as defects. So we are looking at towards low cost fabrication alternatives for photonic crystals. These are the facilities which we have at TIFR, like the standard ultrafast spectroscopy lab. We have tunable lasers, cryostats, time resolved measurement setups. We have a class 1000 clean room with electron beam photo and interference lithography, AFM profilometer, and deposition systems including CVD, ALD, and all this. Okay. So thank you.